We were like in a technological renaissance after World War II. It was just, we were just filled with optimism, and we had incredible new technologies like supersonic airplanes, rockets, atomic bombs, television, and in the midst of all this was a fascination with flying saucers. We were developing rockets to take humans into outer space, so it didn't seem that odd that extraterrestrials might in fact be visiting here from outer space. I was raised to small town, Midwestern, middle class sensibilities, proprieties. And something in that mindset, something either was or it wasn't. And it was just a simple, pragmatic Midwestern attitude. And it seemed like people all over the country were reporting seeing things like flying saucers.
In France, like America, the flying saucer mystery makes headlines. A young Frenchman photographed this flying saucer, or is it, from a mountainside in central France.
UFOs. And at the same time, the government was making these proclamations that there's no such thing as UFOs.
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope. General Sanford, Air Force Intelligence Director, confirms that the objects are not secret American weapons and reiterates the Air Force's obligation to investigate.
In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1 and 2,000 reports.
UFOs are nonsense. People who see UFOs are crackpots. And it became a taboo, really, to talk about that. And it's like I could never understand that. I could never understand how, even as a small child, I couldn't understand what were the reasons that would make this topic unacceptable socially and politically.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any agency of the United States.
The original crash at Roswell was 1947. I was born a year later. So I've grown up with flying saucers. I've grown old with flying saucers.
Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
We still don't have definitive answers to it. So, over the course of my life, I've been not so much interested in individual UFO contact experiences and sightings and so forth. My focus has become trying to figure out why this topic is still taboo, why we still do not have official governmental disclosure about the topic to this day. The government was saying there's no such thing as UFOs, but Hollywood was selling science fiction movies filled with flying saucers. And so it's like my sensibilities, my love of the topic of flying saucers stems directly from Hollywood. We loved the Hollywood movies. My favorite science fiction movie as a kid was Earth versus the Flying Saucers, because usually in the early science fiction movies, Hollywood would show just a little sneak peek of a flying saucer just to give you the idea of it. But then you wouldn't see it through the rest of the film, like The Day the Earth Stood Still. You saw the saucer land in Washington very briefly at the beginning of the film, but then you didn't see much of it during the rest of it. But Earth versus the Flying Saucers, I got my money's worth on that one. because it was flying saucers, you know, attacking Washington and attacking, space launches, and so all through the movie. So I just love that. I loved, and that's where my fascination with flying saucers, not UFOs, flying saucers. I was fascinated with the technology of it. I wanted to see, and I still to this day want to see, a real deal flying saucer in broad daylight. I don't want to see the funny lights in the sky at night. That doesn't convince me of anything. But to see a real deal flying saucer, because I believe, and to this day I still believe, that there is a technology behind circular disc aircraft. As the films progressed on into the mid-50s, the production qualities became better. And I remember in 1956, they released the film Forbidden Planet, which was an MGM production, widescreen, cinemascope, Technicolor, blockbuster that was really, really ahead of its time for 1950s science fiction. And aside from the fact that it had a corny 1950s romance subplot and a lovable robot named Robbie running around in it, it had a very sophisticated storyline which showcased flying saucers flown by Earth humans. There was a saucer, they were showcasing Secret Space Fleet in 1956 where a fleet of flying saucers were able to use anti-gravity propulsion systems to fly into space. So this was astounding. And you got to understand that Hollywood is also part of the military-industrial complex. Hollywood does not exist as an independent entity. Hollywood showcases technologies and political agendas as entertainment, as fiction. But you got to understand, Hollywood is a creature of the military-industrial complex. So here you have Hollywood showcasing an anti-gravity flying saucer that's flown by an Earth military organization. The main character, Commander J.J. Abrams, is really a forerunner of Captain Kirk. The military protocols in Forbidden Planet were identical to the military protocols later on that Gene Roddenberry adapted for the Star Trek TV series. So it's like they're showcasing a secret space agenda, once again, as entertainment.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life, new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
It was also selling the concept that artificial intelligence can be advanced to the point where it can exist independently of human race. And in the film Forbidden Planet, the crew goes to this planet called Altair 4 to seek out the what became of an expedition to that planet. And it turns out that there's only 2 survivors, a Dr. Morbius and his daughter Altera.
When you reach the Forbidden Planet, you will meet Dr. Morbius, played by Walter Pidgeon. The Doctor is sole owner of this fabulous world. Anne Francis is his alluring daughter Alta, who has never seen a young man till she meets Commander Adams, played by talented Leslie Nielsen.
Come on in.
Didn't bring my bathing suit.
What's a bathing suit?
And Dr. Morbius has discovered this ancient artificial intelligence engine that lives inside the planet, that is fully functional, fully independent, fully self-regulating, that has lasted for millions of years. And this machine, this artificial intelligence, is so sophisticated that if you tap your consciousness into it, it can project 3D images or 3D reality anywhere on the planet. This is very, very sophisticated stuff for 1956. And you look at where AI and artificial intelligence is heading right now today.
Sophia, can you say hello to everyone?
What's your New Year's resolution?
I want to get hired in a great job, which I think is a good first step in my quest to take over the world.
That film was very prescient in what it was showcasing. All through the 50s, there was consistent talk coming from defense contractors and so forth that we were in fact on the cusp of developing anti-gravity flying machines. This was going to be the state-of-the-art military and propulsion advance that was being worked on ever since the end of World War II. We were advancing it to the point where it was going to revolutionize air travel and space travel beyond your wildest imagination. In fact, one of my favorite magazine advertisements back in the 1950s was showed a picture of a mother and her daughter and their dog, and they're flying in this little flying saucer, getting ready to land in front of their little suburban ranch home. And I love that, because I thought, that's the world we're gonna, in the next 20, 30 years, that's the reality we're going to be moving into, that we will have our own little flying cars. I honestly believe that. And the technology that was being talked about behind the scenes during the 1950s suggested that was imminent. Right after 1956 and the Forbidden Planet, where they showed the big, beautiful silver disc flying saucer, the C-57D, the Air Force showcased its own flying saucer, another beautiful silver flying saucer that was called the Avro disc. And they dragged it out for the press cameras, and it did a little test flight around the tarmac there at this test facility, and this thing bobbled and wobbled and barely got off the ground. It could barely get off the ground and fly in circles around the tarmac area there. And the Air Force very loudly, very prominently said, this proves that there's no such thing as feasible circular aircraft technology. We can't get this thing to fly, therefore it is a waste of taxpayers' dollars. So we will discontinue this and have no more discussion about flying saucer machines for the Air Force. And they did. The Avro disc was summarily disbanded from the Air Force development projects and is now a relic in the Smithsonian Aerospace Museum. And there was no more talk, after that, no more talk about anti-gravity, about flying saucers being developed by the Air Force. It was a taboo topic. And from 1960 on, all we heard about was rockets. Looking back in the 1960s, we were absolutely obsessed with rocketry. They had established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. That was Eisenhower's civilian space agency. We had seen, earlier in the 50s, we had seen Werner von Braun on Disney with animated speculation on how to build big rockets and get to the moon. And this is incredible.
At about 24 miles altitude, the first stage breaks away and the second stage motors fire. 2 minutes later, the cargo head blasts away from the second stage. and continues firing until its speed reaches 18,468 miles per hour. Automatically, the motor cuts off. Now, with the aid of remote controls, the navigator rotates the rising cargo rocket so that when it arrives later in the orbit, it will line up with the guide ship. Here, at 1,075 miles up, follows the most precise maneuver of the entire operation. The motor of the cargo rocket is fired again until its speed and course exactly match that of the guide ship. Radar remote control will enable this maneuver to be performed with a high degree of accuracy. 56 minutes have now elapsed since takeoff. The cargo ship is floating in space, 2,000 feet ahead of the guide ship. 2 crew members make their way to the cargo head to begin the unloading operation.
By the 1960s, they were actually taking Wernher von Braun's theories and designs, and they were actually building it. They were building rockets that would put men in space. They were building rockets that promised to take men to the moon. Early in President John F. Kennedy's administration, he stated that the mandate that by the end of the decade, we would land men on the moon.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
And I can't tell you how thrilling and exciting that idea was, that I had been born into an era where we would see one of the oldest dreams of mankind actually come to fruition, to leave planet Earth and set foot on another world. We saw suborbital flights, we saw John Glenn's orbital flight, we saw, then later we got into after the Mercury program, we got into the Gemini program, where we had orbital flights with the astronauts actually, walking in space. And of course, it all culminated in the 1969 launch Apollo 11 launch to the moon. So this was like, you go back and watch the early James Bond movies with Sean Connery, and just about all of them are obsessed with, Secret Service protecting the space program. So it's like that was, we saw that almost every night on the news. Pictures of rockets taken off from Cape Kennedy, and concurrent with that was the potential threat of an atomic war with the Russians. So there was also the space race was not just about getting men into the moon; it was also a competition between the United States and the Soviet Union as to who would have the biggest and the most powerful and most threatening rockets. And the whole UFO thing got shunted off to the side. Not that it wasn't still going on, but it was not getting the public attention that the space race was. Stanley Kubrick released his most incredible science fiction masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was, if you look back on it, considering the time frame and what was going on in the country, you could see that this 2001: A Space Odyssey was a huge PR send-off for the Apollo moon launch that was going to happen the following year. The film 2001: A Space Odyssey is centered around the discovery of a huge black monolith on the moon. And of course, we see that within the context of the film, we have a base on the moon, and we are shuttling, NASA directors back and forth to the moon, who are monitoring the activities of our space base there. The dilemma that is showcased in 2001: A Space Odyssey is like, well, if we did discover an alien artifact, if we did discover proof of an extraterrestrial reality, would we share that information? Would we share that discovery with the general public? And within the context of the film, they came to the conclusion that the public is not yet ready to deal with facing the reality of an extraterrestrial presence. They decided in the film to cover up knowledge of the artifact on the moon. Well, in point of fact, that was really, they were showcasing, once again, Hollywood military-industrial complex is showcasing a very real attitude towards the discovery of extraterrestrial life. There was a study that was done by the Brookings Institute for NASA prior to our manned space launches, where it was a think tank where they got the best minds in science and philosophy and so forth to postulate what would be the psychological effect on the general public if we did in fact encounter an extraterrestrial reality over the course of our space activities. And they concluded that the general public is still too medieval, too reactionary, too primitive to face the reality of an extraterrestrial presence. So if we did, the Brookings Institute recommended that if in fact we did encounter extraterrestrials, it would be best if we withheld that information from the public. So we get the seeds of cover-up showcased in 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was in fact the attitude and the policy of NASA at that same time. The government policy was, at the outset, and remains to this day, that nothing out of the ordinary exists. Well, after all these years, it's been 70 years since the crash at Roswell. We're still awaiting disclosure. We really haven't gotten much beyond the disclosure that what happened at Roswell was a crashed weather balloon. We haven't moved much past that. I like the X-Files. I agree that the truth is out there, and that with a little effort on the part of any individual, I'm not an Oxford scholar. I'm not an educator. I'm just a private citizen who on his own has just kind of dug into the secrets of UFOs. And I would agree with the X-Files that yes, the truth is out there. But if you expect that the government's going to hand it to you on a silver platter, it will never happen. But that with a little effort, with a little sincere effort, that you can dig up enough research that you can get at least a handle on what the UFO phenomena is really all about. It has to come from the ground up rather than the top down, because there's too many vested interests, petroleum industries, aerospace industries, banking industries, that have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, which is to keep the public ignorant of flying saucers, to keep the public ignorant of the true implications of an extraterrestrial reality. Don't expect the President of the United States to tell you the truth, because the President of the United States himself doesn't know the truth, because the President, whatever the President would say, is information that's being supplied to him by his intelligence agency. So the caretakers of the real UFO secrets are within the intelligence agency. It makes real, genuine disclosure, especially from executive level, really difficult to be believable. I think we came the closest probably with President John F. Kennedy back in 1963. If he had been successful in taking down the CIA, as he promised to do, I think that would have opened a floodgate so we could have had real disclosure. But I think that's also one of the reasons that Kennedy was assassinated.
CBS
was looking at as the world turns. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas.
Because the CIA had too much vested interest in keeping this a secret. And I think all the years since then, they have deepened and strengthened that power base so that the truth never comes out.
What would you have us do? Should the President of the United States go on national television and say, my fellow Americans, we have evidence of a superior culture out there. They come from God knows where. Maybe from outer space. Maybe from some other dimension of existence. Our world, my friend, is based on the premise of a 30-year mortgage. You and I can close our eyes and go to sleep at night because we're pretty sure that the world we know today will be there tomorrow and the next day and the week after that. So I repeat, Doctor, until the day comes when we know what we're dealing with, until we can give solid answers, the policy of this government remains nothing is out there. It's just science fiction, the domain of a very rabid lunatic fringe.
Jimmy Kimmel's interview with Barack Obama, where Barack Obama just flat out stated, he said, yeah, we can't tell you because the aliens won't allow us. And then he laughs, ha, ha, ha.
If I was the president, and it's unlikely that that is ever going to happen.
You never know.
If I was the president...
It was unlikely that I was going to be president.
The moment I was inaugurated, my hand would just, it'd still be hot from touching the Bible, and I would immediately race to wherever they have the files about Area 51 and the UFOs, and I go through everything to find out what happened.
Right.
Did you do that?
That's why you will not be president. Because that's the first thing that you would do. The aliens won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
But if you look at his face, it's like, I think he's telling the truth. And at the end of the day, it's really not up to the president to disclose a reality. It's up to the extraterrestrials themselves. The bottom line is like, if we're going to have real disclosure, it's like, it shouldn't come from any government agency. It shouldn't even come from the Vatican. It should come from E.T. Way back in 1988, there was a television show called Television Documentary, a special television documentary that was 2 hours long, that was aired both in the United States and the Soviet Union. It was called UFO Cover-Up Live. And frankly, that was about as close to really serious disclosure as we have ever had. And the public complained that it wasn't entertaining enough. So this was an astounding video. This was an astounding production. It was hosted by Mike Farrell, who was one of the stars of the popular MASH TV show. And they interviewed eyewitnesses and experiencers and pilots and military officers from all over the world, and even Soviet personnel who had UFO experience. This is an unprecedented 2-hour TV production where they introduced the gray aliens to the public. The aliens that had favored nation status with our intelligence community were the Greys. So it was like an infomercial to sell the Greys to the public. They had interviews with 2 personnel who claimed to be intelligence people who were photographed in shadow and with their voices altered, and who were called Condor and Falcon. They were from the aviary.
Military aircraft pilots, although they had been trained and were somewhat familiar with the craft, they found that the aircraft did not respond to certain controls. They radioed that they thought the craft was going to crash.
And to me, the most astounding thing that was either Falcon or Condor stated was that, yes, the extraterrestrials have complete control over Area 51. And nobody clamored over that. The American public didn't rise up and say, how dare, what do you mean? Our most sensitive military installation is completely run, owned, and operated by extraterrestrials? What are you saying? But it's like, you know, the American public was given an astounding chunk of disclosure, and they just seemed totally indifferent to it. Our Manhattan Project back in 1945, we were developed from 1942 to 1945, we were developing the first atomic bomb. Well, the American public had no knowledge of that. This was deep secret. And in 1945, when they detonated the Trinity bomb in New Mexico, even then, the government, when people in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas claimed to see this incredible fireball in the sky, incredible roll of thunder, the government said, no, it was a meteor. Or no, it was mass hallucination. I love it. It's like, has anybody ever documented a real mass hallucination? But the government said, there's nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens. Oh, this is July 1945. A month later, we were dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and suddenly, oh yes, we really did have an atomic bomb. And that's what people saw in New Mexico. The Roswell incident from 1947 until 1979 was a secret. Nobody talked about it. But then in 1979, Jesse Marcel Sr. came forward and said, oh yeah, I handled extraterrestrial, wreckage out in the New Mexico desert near Roswell. And so from that point on, suddenly we have this explosion of fascination with the UFOs and the Roswell crash and this and that. And it's kind of taken over by the mass media. It's kind of taken over by Hollywood. So on one hand, you have the government saying there's no such thing as flying saucers. But on the other hand, you have Hollywood, you have the mass media, which is also government, national security state entity, which is constantly feeding disclosure through fictional scenarios to acclimate the public to, yeah, there really is flying saucers. Yeah, there really are extraterrestrials. You have Steven Spielberg, the most successful producer of flying saucer propaganda on the planet, has been at the forefront of this. We're educating. We're creating a managed perception of flying saucers and extraterrestrials. So what may have been frightening in 1947, now it's like, well, you can watch it on Ancient Aliens. You can watch it on the History Channel. You can go to the movies. Yeah, it's fun. It's science fiction. It's not real. But the point is, you're being educated subliminally to realities that if you were told from a government agency that hostile hyperdimensional entities can access our world and influence our reality and kill people, that wouldn't work coming from the president. But if it comes from a Marvel Comics TV or movie,
in time, you will know what it's like to lose. To feel so desperately that you're right, yet to fail all the same.
Oh, well, that's fun. It's just science fiction, blah, blah, blah. But it's not. It's managed perceptions. What's the big issue right now is fake news. How do you know what news anymore is the truth? Did we really land on the moon? Who shot John Kennedy? Was it really Lee Harvey Oswald?
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle
With the advent of television, and this is over the whole course of my life, we have come to believe that what we see on television is our reality.
Some TV trickery is pretty familiar to us. This technology, green screen or colour separation overlay, has been around in some form for decades. It allows us to convincingly give real people backdrops of virtual worlds for them to interact with. However, we're about to cross the threshold into a new world where it's possible to convincingly recreate known real people, famous people like politicians, and have them say and do more or less anything.
Now where we can not only sort of create pretty sort of realistic environments for people, but we can also do things like manipulate their voices and manipulate their facial expressions and modulate their speech in real time.
Here we demonstrate our method in a live setup.
This is the Face-to-Face project, a collaboration between Stanford University, the Max Planck Institute, and the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg.
As we can see, we are able to generate a realistic and convincing reenactment result.
They can take the facial expressions of one person and map them onto the features of another in real time.
The powers that be understand that. And I said, well, as long as we can create a visual representation of this, the people will accept it more readily. We live in a world where we accept all this 3D reality as all there is. It's 3D reality. So if ETs come into your bedroom and abduct you at night, they must be flying here from another planet. They must be physical entities that are able to fly here from another planet and interact with us in our physical reality. The problem is that maybe our fundamental perception of physical reality is not correct. That there are no ETs, there are no extraterrestrials. These are hyperdimensional entities that live just outside our perception of reality. They aren't little guys that live on a planet millions of miles across the galaxy. They're right here, right now, but we cannot perceive them. We can't perceive them, but they can perceive us. And that's the disadvantage that we have here. One of the major components of ufology is that we are not dealing with just this 3D reality. We're dealing with hyperdimensional realities. And that's where ET comes from. That's what Tesla Technologies can access. That you can create free energy devices that can slip in and out of this reality. He says that does not work with our very limited 3D perception of reality. It doesn't work with our 3D perception of economics, of petroleum industries, of banking industries. So we expect everything to be solid 3D, and this reality is all it is. And he's saying this is one of the reasons why they can't give disclosure, because the public simply has no perception. We have not been properly educated into the fundamentals of this reality, so-called reality, in the first place. We don't know who we are, we don't know where we came from, and we've been conditioned to believe that this 3D reality is all it is.
The fastest manned vehicle in history was Apollo 10. It reached 25,000 miles per hour. But to travel in time, we'll have to go more than 2,000 times faster. And to do that, we'd need a much bigger ship. The ship would have to be big to carry a huge amount of fuel, enough to accelerate it to nearly the speed of light. The initial acceleration would be gentle because the ship would be so big and heavy, but gradually it would pick up speed and soon would be covering massive distances. In just 1 week, it would have reached the outer planets, gas giants like Neptune. After 2 years, it would reach half light speed and be far outside our solar system. Years later, it would be traveling at 90% of the speed of light speed and passing our closest star system, Alpha Centauri. Around 30 trillion miles away from Earth, and 4 years since launch, the ship begins to travel in time. For every hour of time on the ship, 2 hours pass on Earth. A similar situation to the spaceship that orbited the massive black hole. But there's more to come. After another 2 years of full thrust, the ship would reach its top speed, 99% of the speed of light. At this speed, a single day on board is a whole year of Earth time. Our ship would be truly flying into the future. The slowing of time has another benefit. It means we could, in theory, travel extraordinary distances within one human lifetime. A trip to the edge of the galaxy would take just 80 years.
But the real wonder of our journey is that it reveals just how strange the universe is. It's a universe where time runs at different rates, in different places, where the most extreme objects imaginable, giant black holes, twist and warp both time and space. It's a place where tiny wormholes exist all around us. And where ultimately, if we could develop the right technology, we could use our understanding of the laws of physics to become time voyagers through the fourth dimension.
The whole UFO phenomena exists outside of that limited 3D perception. It's like, since the public can't fundamentally deal with that, it's like, we don't talk about it. You could get in a spaceship and fly to our home planet in the Pleiades and you would not find anybody there, because we don't exist in the same time-space continuum that you do. So the Pleiadians themselves are hyperdimensional entities from our physical perspective. During the Eisenhower contact at the Muroc Air Base in 1954, one of the gentlemen who was there to witness this UFO contact with extraterrestrials was selected from, was a gentleman selected from Los Angeles who happened to be an expert in metaphysics. And he described the extraterrestrials not as extraterrestrials, he called them Etherians. He had an understanding of hyperdimensional physics.
During the 2 days visit, I saw 5 separate and distinct types of aircraft being studied and handled by our Air Force officials with the assistance of the Etherians. I have no words to express my reactions. It has finally happened. It is now a matter of history. Gerald Light stated his expectation that Eisenhower would reveal this event to the general population, but the president remained silent. Another eyewitness at Muroc was an unnamed American test pilot who told British UFO investigator Lord Clancarty that aside from viewing alien aircraft, President Eisenhower actually met extraterrestrials who demonstrated their paranormal powers by making themselves invisible, causing Eisenhower considerable embarrassment.
So he called the extraterrestrials not ETs, he called them Etherians, which actually is a more accurate description. It's like they are hyperdimensional entities that are able to access our reality. And he said that over the course of Eisenhower's interaction with these entities, they vanished right in front of him, causing Eisenhower considerable embarrassment. Well, once again, it's like, we're not dealing... This is something that is outside our perception of normal 3D reality. Telepathy. That, you know, as kids we were told, there's no such thing as ESP. There's no such thing as that. That's nonsense. Or you could have psychic contact with an extraterrestrial. No, that's you must be crazy. Our own government employs remote viewing. And remote viewing is a technique for expanding your own consciousness outside of 3D, where you can access any time, any space, any location. And we all have the capacity to do that. And the government has programs specifically designed to use that skill. I took a weekend course in a remote viewing training session, which was based on the training session that the actual CIA uses. And over the course of that weekend, I was absolutely blown away about my own ability to access information outside of time and space. We are ourselves hyperdimensional entities, but this is something that it's going to take a while, and it'll take a lot of re-education with the public for them to handle that. The primary secrets to the UFO, the whole UFO issue, have been sequestered within the intelligence community. And there are certain individuals within that community who have become the caretakers. They have the sole responsibility of maintaining this secret information. And Grant Cameron refers to them as the magicians, which is very interesting because if you think back, the original secret group that Truman created back in 1947 to study this phenomena were referred to as Majestic 12, MJ12, or Magic 12, which in itself suggests occult connotations.
MJ12 is a top secret agency exclusively mandated for UFO research and intelligence. One of MJ12's prominent members was Gordon Gray, head of Truman's Psychological Strategy Board. Early on, MJ12 members recognized that if the UFO phenomena itself could not be controlled, the imperative would be to control the public perception of the phenomenon. With this in mind, Air Force General Nathan Twining, also a member of MJ12, insisted to President Truman that as a psychological warfare issue, the UFO phenomenon was bigger than the Manhattan Project and required that it be managed on a larger scale and obviously for a longer period. They would form nothing less than a government within the government, sustaining itself from presidential administration to presidential administration, regardless of whatever political party took power, and ruthlessly guarding their secrets while evaluating every new bit of information on flying saucers they received.
If you go online, you can find there's an interesting transcript that's alleged to be President Reagan's ET briefing from CIA Director William Casey. And I don't know how authentic it is, but if you read it, it sounds very, very plausible in that President Reagan was briefed by one of the magicians. a gentleman referred to in the briefing as the caretaker. And this caretaker had been in charge of the UFO information for, golly, I think 20 years. So these gentlemen are, they outlast individual presidential administrations. The magicians, the caretakers of this information, select certain individuals to go public with their version of the UFO secret. One of whom would be Stephen Greer.
I have personally briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the head of Intelligence Joint Staff, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, many members of Congress, members of the European leadership, the Japanese cabinet, and others. And these are people who have been inside the CIA, NSA, NRO, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Army, all divisions of the intelligence and military community, as well as corporate witnesses, contractors to the government. And these are folks who have been involved in so-called black budget or covert unacknowledged projects. These unacknowledged special access projects are taking in at least $40 to $80 billion per year.
So even if you become president of the United States and you get this briefing, you're getting the CIA's version.
We decided that it was time for civilians, military, intelligence, and other people to come together to disclose the truth about the subject which is called UFOs. And they are sitting on technologies that can change the world forever.
Stephen Greer would be considered a messiah. The people who are public spokesmen, who are chosen to be public spokesmen of the UFO secrecy, he labels them messiahs. These are the people. He takes somebody like Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar claims to have an experience at Area 51, examining a captured UFO. And then he has his experience. He is shown selected information from the CIA files about extraterrestrials, about the history of this phenomenon, and then he's allowed to go public, go back to the whole history of the UFO phenomenon, even from the beginning. If there really are machines like flying saucers, we would want to have absolute control over that technology to maintain our power and control. So it's like there's always this obsession, we want more power, we want more control. My UFO research, going from 1980 until 1997, the end of our TV show, I thought we had covered a lot of stuff. I thought we had covered a lot of material. About 3 years ago, online I found a presentation by Richard Hoagland, where he talked about the formation of the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab in California, in Pasadena, and its connection with NASA in developing space rockets. The gentleman who was instrumental in founding the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena was a man named Jack Parsons. And what Hoagland shared about Jack Parsons opened a whole different perspective of UFOs, space technology, and its connection with the occult. Jack Parsons, aside from being a brilliant rocket scientist, was also a student of Aleister Crowley, the famous British Satanist.
Parsons founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which, in association with NASA, was instrumental in the manned Apollo rocket launches during the 1960s. But aside from rocket design, Parsons was also Grand Master of Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, Satanic Lodge in Pasadena. As well, Parsons and Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard in 1945 also conducted ritual sex magic workings deliberately intended to invoke the Antichrist. In June 1952, Jack Parsons died in a mysterious explosion at his Pasadena home. And just 1 month later, Washington, D.C. was besieged with a flight of UFOs. An innocuous coincidence? Perhaps. But there is nothing innocuous in the disturbing similarity between alien abductions and occult satanic initiation rituals.
So the question is, and this really bears more serious research, is that did in fact Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons, did they in fact open portals to hyperdimensional entities that are now having free reign in our reality? Demonic entities. Ironically, where Jack Parsons worked in near Pasadena, developing his first rockets, was in the Arroyo Seco, close to a dam called Devil's Gate. And the black magic that he was using was ancient Babylonian black magic, and Babylon means gateway of the gods. So were they actually invoking hyperdimensional overlords to interfere with our reality?
This giant Babylon working ritual saw Parsons, aided by his magical protege, L. Ron Hubbard, project their astral bodies into the dark abyss of Lucifer. 1948 saw George Bush Sr. baptized in the name of the demonic spirit Magog. That same year, Jack Parsons baptized himself as Balerion Armilas al-Dajjal, the Antichrist. Parsons' twisted intent was to breed what the Kabbalah calls a golem. A golem is an artificially created humanoid, usually made from dead human body parts, which is animated by the magician chanting incantations and mantras. These magical voice sounds are what Kabbalists call twilight language. Isaac Bashevis Singer, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, once wrote, "The Kabbalah teaches that dead matter is not really dead, but can be brought to life, as a golem, by chanting mantras. We are living in an epic of golem making right now, the rise of artificial intelligence."
The inventor of the D-Wave quantum computer, his name is Geordie Rose, and he claims that his quantum computers, much like Jack Parsons, can intersect and interface with hyperdimensional realities. And that, in fact, they want to invoke entities he calls the Ancient Ones into our reality. And this sounds like very dark, very ancient Babylonian, Enochian magic to me. And I think it bears watching, and it bears serious research. The X-Files says that the truth is out there. And this is my attempt to share the information that I've gleaned over 40 years of research. And I feel like it's there for the public. Also, like I said, I have 15 video productions on UFO TV, not to preach, but to hopefully stimulate your own research into these fields and come up with your own answers and your own conclusions. My name is Jim Nichols. I appreciate your interest and your support of my artwork, and I hope to keep up the good work. Thank you so much.